Everybody, are these on? Can you hear me? I don't know if they, here we go. Hello and welcome to the National Archives for today's Chief FOIA Officer Council meeting. I am Gary Stern. I am NARA's General Counsel. I'm also NARA's Chief FOIA Officer, so I'd be here no matter what. And I'm one of the public liaisons for NARA, so I fill all the roles. And wait, before we begin, I need to say a few quick logistical things. In order to ensure as many people can participate as possible, we are live streaming this meeting on YouTube and monitoring the chat. We have also opened up our conference line for people to listen in. So if you are joining us by phone, please mute your line so that our live captioner can hear the speakers and isn't distracted by whatever else you might be doing while you're multitasking online. So if you guys had seen the earlier versions of the agenda, you would have noticed that David Ferriero, Archivist of the United States, was on the agenda as giving the introductory remarks. Unfortunately, he's not here. That's why I am. And he turns out he was double booked and is currently in Portland, Oregon at the Society of American Archivists conference, annual conference. And therefore, and I guess you can't really blame him for choosing to be with archivists over us FOIAists. But to paraphrase David, welcome to our house. This is our beautiful McGowan Theater in our main National Archives building for all the folks here in the room. And we appreciate being able to host this event. And don't forget, and you are welcome after the event for those in the room. You can go upstairs and check out all of our exhibits in the main rotunda, the public vaults, the Rubenstein Gallery with the Magna Carta, and our temporary exhibit, I think, is still Amending America, and is a great show. And of course, check out the store. And it's funny, thinking of FOIA and one of my all-time favorite numbers, I looked on my phone and saw my inbox, which happens to be rather large, at least the one on my phone, and what was the number? 552. Which I often notice when I'm leaving the office, getting in my car late in the day, I look in there, it's 5:52 p.m., and I think FOIA. So let me just make a few quick comments on why and how we all got here today in this building. In passing last year's FOIA amendments, Congress mandated the creation of this Chief FOIA Officers Council to play a critical role in identifying strategies to improve the FOIA process for agencies and requesters, and they also, in parallel, mandated setting up of the FOIA Advisory Committee, which was just meeting in this very room at this table last week, and so that's, trying to work together, advice from the outside, us all meeting on a regular basis are kind of critical strategies, new strategies in the FOIA and required by FOIA. But as you may know, if anyone's taken the time to read NARA's strategic plan, making access happen and connecting with customers are two of our core goals. In fact, it's what we do. It's a mission of our agency. To provide access to records to the public and to our customers. So for most of you folks in other agencies in which FOIA is just one small program or mission vis-a-vis the core mission of the agency, for NARA it's all we do. It's the main thing we do. And as I like to say, we've actually been doing access and openness and access to records from long before there was a FOIA, so then we've now integrated FOIA into our processes, but that's our mission. And so that's why we are very pleased to be able to host this council. And we're also pleased that that today's meeting is focused on ways to improve customer service in coordination with agency public liaisons. So it's connecting the missions that we always think about, connecting with customers, making access happen, and connecting the role of the public liaison to the function of the Office of Government Information Services, OGIS, which, as you know, is part of NARA, and And that goes back to the 2007 amendments to FOIA. When Congress amended FOIA 10 years ago, it tried to improve the relationship between agencies and requesters by introducing, in a formal way, dispute resolution into the FOIA administrative process, most notably by creating OGIS as an office with that role and helping to bridge the relationship between requesters and agencies and placing it in the National Archives. Equally important, though, those amendments of 2007 codified the FOIA public liaison role and position within agencies. And so it's a critical responsibility for having those people to assist requesters and then giving requesters the opportunity to contact the FOIA public liaison, which, as I noted, I am, and in fact, being in that role and being named in our FOIA responses for certain types of records, for our agency operational records, it has increased my inbox, increased my workload in trying to respond directly when I'm contacted. But it's also increased OGIS's workload since as of last year. Now agencies notify requesters that they can contact OGIS at any point in the administrative process, not just after an appeal. So that's why it's really critical to kind of coordinate all those roles, and that's what the panel discussion is going to talk about. In any event, I now want to just thank our co-chairs, Melanie Puste, Director of OIP at DOJ, and Alina Simo, Director of OGIS, who was wrested away from my own staff. She, as many of you know, worked in the Office of General Counsel at NARA as our Director of Litigation until last year when she became Director of OGIS. And I want to thank the panel members for joining us today and participating and sharing their experiences. And now I'll turn it over to, I think, Melanie, or Alina, or both.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I was hoping it would be like I'd have somehow 5.52 in the time that I started speaking so I could match Gary. But of course, I think about FOIA all the time, having worked in this field for so long now, as many of you know. I got up probably at 5:52 and don't even know it. That's right. That's right. So today, first of all, welcome. I'd like to share my welcome as well to everyone, and also to pass on the welcome from the Deputy Director of Management at OMB, who's also a member of the Chief FOIA Officer Council, who had a conflict this morning and couldn't make the meeting, but wanted to pass on his regards to everyone. And we'll obviously report back to him as to how things went today. What we wanted to do, when Alina and I were talking about the content of this meeting, we thought the timing is really perfect. We're 1 year after enactment of the FOIA Improvement Act, and there were the changes, as Gary mentioned, to the law that required all these additional notifications in agency response letters about the services offered by the services available to requesters through the FOIA public liaison of the agency and through OGIS. So what we wanted to do today, we sort of have two big aspects to our council meeting today. We wanted to first just sort of briefly recap those notice requirements that are in the law, and then also have a discussion as to whether there are any. We have some small suggested tweaks to the standard language that we have been advising agencies to use when they notify requesters of those services. But we very much wanted to hear from the folks that are here in the room as to whether there's any other tweaks that we could make. We want to be sure. Now there are so many players and so many places to go for assistance. While obviously that's a terrific thing, we understand that it also can be confusing, and we want to make sure it's not confusing. Because in addition, of course, to FOIA public liaisons and OGIS, at DOJ, we've made sure to include FOIA requester service centers, which are actually really the front line personnel within an agency who are going to directly have information, the most directly have information about the request. So we've included those in our contact information and notifications as well. So That's going to be our first discussion. And then after that, we want to talk about the roles of FOIA Requester Service Centers and FOIA Public Liaisons, as well as the role that OGIS plays in the process. And then that will set us up for our panel discussion. So that's kind of a preview of everything that we're planning to do today. So let's first start with the, okay, I'm going to see if I can do this. Here, I think the mouse. Maybe Amy will just do it for me. Thank you. Yeah, let's first just talk about briefly the statutory notification requirements, just to set the stage and make sure we're all talking from the same spot. So first, the first notice, now these are the new notifications that they're not so new anymore, the one-year-old notifications that are required by the FOIA Improvement Act for agencies to include in certain correspondence they have with requesters. So the first notification is for determinations that are not adverse. So we typically think of this as a full grant. There's some requesters ask for something, you're providing it, so there's not an adverse action. But even so, the FOIA requires agencies to tell the person about their right to seek assistance from the FOIA Public Liaison. Now, in response letters, now actually maybe if I just go back in time, go back to that first one. Because presumably the requester is happy when they're getting a response that is not adverse, the suggested language that we have for agencies to use in this context is to simply say, if you have any questions about the FOIA or the handling of your request, you can contact the FOIA Public Liaison. So one of the things that we've done in our guidance on these points is try to think through, like, again, how do we make this less confusing, less legalistic, and implement these provisions in a logical way. So I don't think there's really been an issue with this part. Where it starts getting a little more tricky is the next couple of places. Where notice has to be included. So in this, when you have an adverse determination by an agency, then there are several things that agencies have to do. They have to give the requester the right to appeal within 90 days. So that was a change. There's now an overall requirement. Everybody has to give at least 90 days to file an appeal. And then here are our notice requirements. The right to seek dispute resolution from either the FOIA Public Liaison or OGIS. Now, even before the adverse determination occurs, if the agency during the beginning of the request determines that there are unusual circumstances and they're going to need more time to process the request, there are several things that were already in the FOIA prior to the FOIA Improvement Act, and that was the requirement that agencies notify the requester that they're going to take more than 10 additional days and give the requester an opportunity to narrow their request. And the FOIA had long required agencies at that point in time to pull in and notify the requester that they could contact the FOIA Public Liaison for help with that. And I think the idea there was help in negotiating or narrowing the request so that it could be processed more quickly. Now what has been added is that in addition to talking to the FOIA Public Liaison, again, agencies can reach out to OGIS at this point in the process. Final notification is in agency appeal letters. Now, this is not in the statute, but based on guidance that OIP issued back in 2010, we've asked agencies to make sure that you include in your appeal determination a notification of the ability of requesters to go seek mediation services from OGIS. So we made a little handy-dandy chart here for you where you can see where you have to talk. Basically, the big decisions that you're making in the agency when you're making adverse determinations or invoking unusual circumstances and need more than 10 additional days, you've got to give double resources, FOIA Public Liaisons and OGIS. And then, of course, at the beginning of the process, if it's a full grant, you give a public liaison notice, really more for just any possible questions. And then lastly, at the appeal stage, when the agency's work is done, you give a pitch to the requester to go to OGIS. So that's the lay of the land. Now, that kind of sets us up to just this discussion I wanted to have with everyone here about sort of the way we convey these notices, these services, these resources, how we convey them to requesters. This is the sample language that we use for the full grant, where there's no adverse determination, where we're just saying, if you have any questions or if there's something we can help you with, please contact Now here we as guidance suggest to agencies that they include the FOIA Requester Service Center as well as the FOIA Public Liaison. Again, this is because the Requester Service Centers are the front line. The FOIA Public Liaisons actually are the supervisory officials above the Requester Service Center. So we want to include that resource as well. I don't think this has been an area where there have been any issues, but before I move on, let me just see if there's any comments about this notification. I think when people are getting what they've asked for, life is good and we're all happy. So, okay. So here's where we have some suggested language for some small tweaks. But I also, again, want to see if folks have any further suggestions. What you see printed here, I know it's small, but this is basically the language, the sample language that OIP issued in our guidance to agencies on giving notification when you've made an adverse determination. What we have in bold is suggested tweaks to that, and that the two sort of changes that we're posing for discussion are making sure that we include the name of the FOIA Public Liaison and not just a reference to the ability to contact a FOIA Public Liaison with no name. And that also that we actually have everyone in their letters, agencies in their letters, sort of set out distinctly the mailing address, the telephone number, the email address, and the fax, if applicable, for that FOIA Public Liaison. The part of the reason for this is, well, it's really like twofold. If you look at the sample letter, you'll see that for the paragraph on notifying OGIS, we've got all that info, all the many ways you can talk to OGIS, their address, their email, their fax, their toll-free number. But if agencies in their notice letter up at the top when they're giving the FOIA Public Liaison, let's just take the most minimal way that could be applied. If the agency simply says, contact our FOIA Public Liaison, doesn't give a name, doesn't give anything else, the concern, and I think the experience that OGIS has had, is that the requester probably just looks at all those numbers down at the second paragraph on OGIS and goes there and doesn't even think to go to the FOIA Public Liaison, or doesn't want to have to take the time to figure out how do I contact the liaison. It sounds like it's much easier to go right to OGIS. The other sort of thing that's hard to see from this, but that also was just a format, was that we were thinking about having the paragraph about OGIS be a separate paragraph from the paragraph about the FOIA Public Liaison. Again, to make it more clear that there are these two distinct avenues that requesters can pursue. I just wanted to, and I'm just very interested to see if anybody have any further comments on that. Is there anything further that people think should go in here? Yes.
At Postal Service, we prefer that people just mail us.
Oh, Postal Service, of course you want mail. I'm just laughing, excuse me. Do you provide an email, though? Do you provide an email, a fax, a telephone? Do you provide any of those other kinds of resources? Because obviously mail, I know you're joking in part.
Reluctantly, we provide telephone and email addresses.
Okay, good. All right. I had a feeling you were joking. So I won't even respond then. So we got the joke got it. Thank you. Anybody else have any comments on this? Yes.
The last paragraph. It can be read if you're not satisfied with the response to this request, meaning the request you make to OGIS or to the public liaison, you may administratively appeal.
Right.
That's the intent.
Right, it's definitely not the intent. The intent there is to provide the administrative appeal pitch for the FOIA response. But that's a good point. Thank you. I mean, and that's something we can easily fix.
Melanie, I think
Thank you. Yes, Jim.
Determination. With the determination.
Termination made on your request or something like that. Yeah, thank you. I hope, well, this is all being recorded. I'm not writing all this down, but folks will write this down for me. Thank you. I'm getting the nod. Thank you. Yes. Great, great. Yes.
So I actually think it's better to have, like you do for OGIS, a central, we give contact information, but not necessarily a name. We give an email, you could have like the FOIA Service Center and then that number, because obviously some people
Yeah,
name, phone number, email address, etc.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying, and obviously the FOIA Requester Service Center as well, sort of by definition, not necessarily by definition, but in concept, I'll put it that way, it's multiple people. I'm hesitating because I know for smaller agencies it might just be one person that makes up the whole center, but in other agencies the center can be a group of FOIA professionals. Here's what my thought, and I hear your point too, and my thought is, obviously I want to make sure that agencies have some flexibility in how they do this. I think, but these, what I'm trying to do is make sure that the template that we provide you captures as many of these suggestions as possible. And I hear what you're saying about the name, and it might also be, what's nice about a name, and not necessarily the name of the FOIA Public Liaison. You know, at DOJ, we've long advocated for agencies to provide the name of a human being that requesters can call to talk to about their request. So it might very well be that the name you give is the analyst who's been processing the request, who has maybe been already in contact, actually hopefully has already been in contact with this requester, so that they can continue to have a conversation with that person. So I would give flexibility. I definitely see the point of giving flexibility. Any other comments on this? Okay, good. That was great. That was really terrific. At this point then, now that this work was done, let me see if I wanted to just give a quick overview of what these people are supposed to be doing, what they're charged with doing, the FOIA Requester Service Centers and FOIA Public Liaisons. So as I've been mentioning all along, the Service Center is a group of either one person or more inside the agency, and we think of the Requester Service Center as the front line, the actual people typically who are processing requests. And the FOIA Requester Service Center for any given request might simply be the analyst processing the request. But these are the initial people in the agency working with FOIA who know how the process works and who can most easily answer questions about the status of a request, status of a backlog at the agency, all those kind of issues. Now, the FOIA Public Liaisons are a supervisory official, so they're supposed to be that sort of a next level up, and as laid out in the FOIA itself, the FOIA Public Liaison is someone that the requester can go to if they have concerns about what's happening at the service center, and these are also people who are designated by the Chief FOIA Officer. The example we always give to sort of distinguish between a service center and a FOIA Public Liaison is just think about all the times when you're calling about a service. You're waiting for your car to get out of the garage, you're waiting for the repairman to come to your house, and if even though the person that you're talking to on the phone is saying, well, I'm sorry, the car's not ready, it's going to take it's going to take till tomorrow, it's going to take till next week, you sometimes, as the consumer, want to say, well, let me just speak to your supervisor. And so the supervisor in the FOIA context would be the FOIA Public Liaison. And when you hear the FOIA Public Liaison say the exact same thing, no, it is going to be tomorrow, it's going to be next week, here are the issues, at least then you have sort of confirmation. You feel better that, yes, that what you've been told is right. That's kind of the idea behind having these two levels. But also, of course, the FOIA Public Liaison has more overarching duties, and that's to assist in reducing delays. So they're looking out for how the FOIA program is working inside the agency. They're also looking to increase transparency about the process, about the status of requests, and assisting in resolving disputes. So FOIA Public Liaison, and it's going to be really interesting to hear on our panel, they're there to work with requesters to make the process go as smoothly as possible. There are lots of resources that are available to FOIA Public Liaisons. Obviously, they have institutional knowledge. They know what's happening with FOIA inside their agency. They've got their reference guides in the agency. They have knowledge of their own agency regulations. They, of course, work with the Requester Service Center and the actual other FOIA professionals in the agency. Those are all the resources that the FOIA Public Liaison uses in their engagement with requesters. And then, of course, OIP has issued lots of guidance that is applicable in this context. We have multiple guidance articles on the importance of communication and how to communicate with requesters, about status information when giving fee estimates, using the requester's preferred form of communication. That's all addressed in our guidance. And then we also have guidance, of course, from when OGIS was first created about the importance of notifying requesters of the services provided by OGIS. And that leads us up right now to a discussion of what does OGIS provide in the process. And I want to introduce my colleague, Alina Simo, to do that part of our talk today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at today's meeting. Those of you who are watching us on Livestream, welcome. For those of you who do not know me, I am Alina Simo. I am the Director of the Office of Government Information Services, OGIS. And I'll just briefly say I was honored by the Archivist of the United States to appoint me to this position back in December of last year. As Gary mentioned before, I was in the General Counsel's office as the Director of Litigation. But I have spent many years of my career working on FOIA issues, and maybe Melanie doesn't want me to tell this story, but I started out my legal career as a law clerk in OIP back many years ago. So I've known Melanie for a long time. We go way back. So I thought it'd be very useful to talk a little more generally about the role of dispute resolution in the FOIA process and the differences between FOIA public liaisons versus OGIS, as we try to help requesters and give you just a brief overview of OGIS's approach to dispute resolution. So I know we've already covered this slide, but I'll just reinforce the fact that the concept of dispute resolution as a way to improve customer service and the FOIA process was introduced by Congress in 2007. In 2007, of course, Congress also codified the role of the FOIA public liaison. And the same act also created our office. As Melanie has discussed, the most recent amendments of the FOIA brought to us in 2016 through the FOIA Improvement Act do include the specific requirements that agencies notify requesters about their rights to seek dispute resolution services from agency FOIA public liaisons and OGIS. Definitely, our work has skyrocketed, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. We have put together a great handout, which is also available on our website, that we thought would be very helpful to requesters. That is just a little checklist that tells folks about the different ways that OGIS and FOIA public liaisons or FOIA requester service centers can be helpful to requesters throughout the process. One of the most helpful things OGIS can do early in the FOIA process is to help facilitate discussion between requester and the agency, or reestablish communication between the parties. As the FOIA Ombudsman, we try to help educate the public about the FOIA process, answer a lot of general questions. And FOIA requester service centers and FOIA public liaisons, on the other hand, are the best positioned to provide assistance by helping requesters understand the type of records the agency possesses, or suggesting how a requester might be able to narrow their request to reduce fees or be eligible for a faster track. As a non-exclusive alternative to litigation, OGIS is probably best suited to assist requesters with substantive issues after the requester has completed the administrative appeals process, although we're happy to help at any stage. So here are some numbers. There was a large amount of variation in the figures the agencies reported last year. Generally, though, agencies have processed more requests. As you can see, reported they were contacted for assistance more often than agencies have processed fee requests, not surprising. Digging into the numbers a little deeper, we noted that about 40% of the agencies that responded to OIP's request for an estimate reported that they are contacted on average about once a month by a requester seeking assistance. We look forward to seeing how the estimates from agencies change in the coming years. We assume that they will increase in large part because we know that OGIS's mediation caseload is increasing. In fiscal year 2016, we opened more than 1,700 mediation cases, which was a record number for the office. And in fiscal year 2017, we are on pace to quadruple the number of requests for our assistance, and we certainly attribute that in no small part to the 2016 amendments. Now that we have a little background and context regarding use of dispute resolution, I'm going to briefly go over our mediation program and our approach to resolving disputes. OGIS does not have the authority to overrule an agency's actions or tell a requester that they are wrong. We also do not have the authority to force parties to enter mediation. Mediation services are always voluntary. Mediation is a completely party-driven process. We are here to help facilitate a process that allows the agency and the requester to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. Although one of Congress's goals for the creation of our office was to prevent litigation, requesters are always free to file a lawsuit at any time during the mediation process. Of course, we should also explain what we're not able to do. OGIS cannot tell agencies they must release documents, act as the Foia police. I know some requesters would like for us to do that. We cannot process requests or review appeals. We certainly cannot help with issues outside the realm of Foia or dictate the resolution of a dispute. Despite these limitations, requesters ask for our help because our process works in a wide variety of instances. Not all of the issues that we deal with are complex. As I mentioned earlier, one of our important functions as the FOIA Ombudsman is to educate people about the FOIA and the FOIA process. Many of our simple cases call on us to address misunderstandings between requesters and agencies, or educate requesters about the way that the FOIA process is intended to work. For more complex issues, our reputation as a neutral party with subject matter expertise helps us to work with the parties to identify issues and develop solutions. The reasons that people file FOIA litigation are complex and diverse, and we do not have any way to track how many lawsuits have been prevented by our mediation program, but we do know that there are requesters who have changed their minds about filing a lawsuit after going through our process. And we also know of cases where the parties have been able to settle parts of the dispute, narrowing the issues in litigation and saving the court from having to deal with those issues. For any FOIA professionals out here today, watching us on Livestream or hearing us by telephone, who are interested in sharpening their dispute resolution skills, we do offer a communication skills training session twice each fiscal year. These training sessions are completely free for agencies and are held right here at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The sessions have become quite popular and generally fill up within 12 hours of registration, so if you're interested, sign up fast. We do also offer tailored training for agencies upon request. For example, we provided training to the State Department at NARA earlier this year, and we do travel to where FOIA professionals in the agency are located, such as the CDC in Atlanta and USCIS this fall. There's our wonderful contact information, which I know you've seen earlier. Just another note that the best way to know when registration opens up for our training sessions is to follow our live feed and, our Twitter and our blog, which is listed up there. And I am now ready to turn over to our panel. We are very happy to see such a great turnout today and so pleased to have all of our panel members joining us. We hope they're going to kickstart a great conversation about how we can improve customer service and make the FOIA process more efficient, both for agencies and requesters. At this point, I would like to invite all of the panelists up to the stage. And once everyone is seated, Melanie will introduce our panelists, and after their discussion, and perhaps even during the discussion, up to Melanie, we will open it up for questions and statements from the audience.
Excuse me. Okay, this is the part of our program today that I'm really looking forward to in particular because, and as I know Alina is too, we really thought it will be helpful to everyone to have a discussion first of all, between our panelists who are a mix of requesters and agency professionals, and also with all of you here. So please feel free to, yell out or raise your hand, and I'll be sure to repeat the question. We're happy to really have this be an interactive discussion. The whole idea here was to see sort of firsthand, 1 year in after these notification provisions went into effect, how is it working? You've heard folks say that there's certainly an increase in the use of FOIA public liaisons and OGIS's services, but we will all always have an interest in making sure that that is done as effectively and efficiently as possible. So first, let me just give you a quick rundown of our panelists. We have Michael Bell at the far end, who's the Deputy Director of FOIA and Privacy and is the FOIA Public Liaison at HHS, a position that he's had since 2013. He's also held leadership positions at the Department of Defense and the Treasury Office of Financial Stability since he came to HHS. He also served as an officer in the United States Air Force, so I would have to point that out because I come from an Air Force family. I'm a proud Air Force brat, so I was happy to have a fellow Air Force contact here on our panel. We also then are going to hear, actually, I'll introduce the people in the order that they're going to be speaking. Michael Morrissey, who is, you can see from his name tag or he could wave, is the founder of MuckRock, which is a nonprofit dedicated to increasing awareness of public data through the Freedom of Information Act and through public records laws. And previously, he was an editor at the Boston Globe and a John Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford. Next, you're going to be hearing from Linda Frye, who's a senior government information specialist at Social Security Administration at their Office of Privacy and Disclosure. And she's been processing requests there for the past 5 years. And Linda has a really interesting background in that her background is in accounting, which is unusual for FOIA. So I wanted to highlight that because it shows you that FOIA attracts people from all walks of life. Next, we'll hear from Michael Reznitsky, who's an attorney in Maryland and has lots of experience in public records and Freedom of Information Act issue, and he's advocated it for improvements in FOIA and information policies for many, many years, and many of us are familiar with Michael. And then lastly, the panel will be closed by Carrie McGuire, who's at OGIS, who's with OGIS and actually leads their mediation team. She's been with OGIS since 2010. And before that, she worked at the American Library Association, which is, I think, a more logical connection with FOIA. And she earned her undergraduate degree from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, which I flagged because I know we have some Wisconsin folks here in the audience who are interested in that. And with that introduction, I'll start off, and then I'll come join you at the table. But I wanted to start with you, Michael Bell. If you could just maybe highlight some of the things that best practices or things that you see in the process that work really well from your position as a FOIA public liaison.
Sure. Good morning. At HHS, we do try to emphasize that communication is a very large part of transparency. If it was an ideal world, if you submit a request, a few days later, especially within the 20-day time frame, you get your response, you're happy. We're happy with what we release, you're satisfied with what you receive, and there's really no extra communication needed. But basically we know we don't live in an ideal world, and we know that sometimes the process can get bogged down a little bit. And that's where we try to communicate with the requesters there, because as Melanie said, as the liaison, we back up what the analysts say. So I think I try to go a little bit further sometimes and explain why it's going to take this long. I try to go into a little more detail and explain the process to them. Where we have to search, why we're having trouble getting the records, without giving too much detail. Because I have to walk the fine line between the agency's interests and the requester's interests, and that's really the toughest part of my job sometimes, just trying to make sure everyone's happy. So trying to almost like a mediator myself, like OGIS. But the thing is, eventually when the process does break down, the worst part is having to give bad news to the requester. No one likes to do that, and especially if you're to blame for the bad news, which happens sometimes. But I tell our people and the other liaisons in the department, just be honest, just suck it up if you've made a mistake, if everyone misses emails. So a requester would much rather hear bad news than no news at all. And that's one thing we try to emphasize, because if they submit a request and they go months without hearing from anyone, that's when they start thinking something's wrong, that's when they start getting antsy, and that starts leading to, just bad vibes between us and the requester, and that can lead to appeals and litigation. So we just really emphasize communication all the way through, from our analysts up to our operating divisions across the country, actually. Another way we try to focus on communication is we're working to emphasize response letters that are actually detail-oriented. So if they're not getting a full release, we try to explain the search procedures, especially for a no record. If information is being withheld in its entirety, we try to do our best to explain what that information is, so it's not just saying, oh, this has been withheld under B5, 2,000 pages or something, because then you're just inviting appeals and lawsuits. So we just try to, as best we can, explain what those records are, just to give information to the requester. And I don't know, requesters they're amazed sometimes when we do communicate with them proactively. I remember once when I was at Department of Defense, I told a long-time requester, I was sorry that your request has taken so long, here's what we're going to do about it. He was just amazed that someone in the government apologized to him. He said that's never happened before, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's our fault, but we're going to fix it. And that's the other thing we try to tell our people. If you tell them there's a problem, explain how you're going to fix it. So that's part of the communication we try to emphasize. Finally, so I don't go too long, we also have been working to improve records management at HHS. Because anyone who works in a FOIA office knows that one of, if not the biggest problem, is just getting the records into your office. Because most of the records, aren't stored in the FOIA office, so we have to go out to other offices within the department to get those records. And there's many reasons why it takes a while to get us those records. One, the people out there, they have their real jobs. They're not FOIA full-time like we are in the office. So they're forced to take time out of their already busy schedules to get the records, and we understand that, but it just bogs down the process. Sometimes it's just government disorganization. The government isn't always the most efficient place in the world, so it's tough to find the records, especially if they're older. So there's many reasons for that, and that's why we're hoping that technology can help that in the future. If we can just do a better job of tracking and storing records, and we might be able to get them to the FOIA office quicker. And if you even want to go a step further, take the FOIA office out of it, and eventually maybe technology allows to have maybe open source records. Once records are created, they're put in a larger database, and requesters can avoid us and just access the records that way. I mean, of course, that's well into the future, so I'll probably be dead by then. But just looking ahead, there's just so many ways with technology we can improve records management, and that's where we're trying to work on now to improve our processes. So basically, that's the two main points that we want to emphasize here. So.
That was all excellent. Thank you. I particularly was struck with your point about the importance of having the response letter itself give some information, because I guess when you think about it in one way, Gary mentioned the increase in inquiries that he's getting as a FOIA public liaison. OGIS has seen an increase in inquiries. I mean, everyone's seeing that because there's more notifications, so more people are aware. We certainly want to, at the front end, reduce the need to ask information. You should, to the extent we can. So every time you have a response letter that explains what has been done in a clear way, and you can possibly avoid someone needing to call and have a question, obviously that's better for efficiency.
Well, I'll just say that everyone was talking about their 552s earlier. Mine was, that's how many calls and emails I got once the FOIA Improvement Act went into effect last summer.
Right.
As soon as my name got out there, it's
Right.
like, HHS gets over 30,000 requests a year
Right.
from all over, and my name was on every acknowledgement letter.
Right.
And so I was getting status request inquiries, things like that.
Right.
And we worked on the process since then, so now they better know where to go. But those first few days, it was probably close to 552 a day. So
I bet. Thank you. Anyone have any questions for Michael, or just yell them out if you? Okay, well, maybe what's good now is we'll hear from Michael Morrissey to get a perspective from the requester side, and things you've seen or suggestions you might have for the whole process.
Yeah.
Connected with this.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much
thank you,
for the
Mike.
invitation to speak here today, and Since starting Muckrock in 2010, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of speaking with hundreds of FOIA officers in offices all around the country, many here today and many represented by the offices here today. And those FOIA officers are among the hardest working, cause-driven, diligent public service servants that I've had the pleasure of meeting. While a lot of people end up in the field accidentally, I find that almost everybody who stays a FOIA officer or involved in the process is there because they really believe in the mission. The stories that bring people into these positions are as diverse and inspiring as America itself. And it's always wonderful to get to talk to somebody who is a veteran and served their country overseas and has come back and now is serving their country by sharing information with the public, or equally as inspiring in many cases are the people who are personnel at an agency who are FOIA officers for a couple hours a week and then juggling 7 other duties as part of their job and still finding a way to make it all work. And it's always amazes me how much people who do this job care about the work and care about the mission. And every day, many of those FOIA officers face almost an impossible job. They stretch dimes into dollars to meet a growing number of complex requests for emails, databases, source code. A few years ago, we got hours and hours of video that was redacted with pixelated faces, and all sorts of requests that when the FOIA Act the Freedom of Information Act was passed just over 50 years ago, I don't think anybody could have imagined. And while there's a lot of admirable updates to the process, including the FOIA Improvement Act that passed last year, a lot of those updates come with sort of 13 dreaded words. No additional funds are authorized to carry out the requirements of this bill. Your offices are being asked to do more and told more specifically how to do it without the resources to tackle those growing challenges. Hit by budget cuts to training and staffing on one side and increased legislation on the other, FOIA officers really do a heroic job at keeping up, and I'm always amazed by that. I've heard stories about how as fiscal years draw to a close, FOIA offices have to get particularly creative, whether that means sneaking into a better funded peer office next door and taking away some paper so that you can just respond to requests, or borrowing hardware and software just to get the job done. And it always amazes me the lengths that people go to do the job. And particularly if there's a big snowstorm coming up in DC, or if there's a possible government shutdown, God forbid, it's amazing. We'll get a surge in responses because FOIA officers just want to get the job done while they can and do their duty to the public. And of course, one of those challenges can often be requesters, and I think that's a bit of a mixed blessing. I think when we started Muckrock in 2010, I'd go into a typical newsroom and ask reporters, how many people have filed a FOIA request before a public records request? And usually there'd be that one FOIA person in the corner, and it was kind of their dark art, and they'd get snippy if sort of younger reporters tried using public records requests, and that was their beat. And 7 years later, it's remarkable. FOIA is cool. I've talked a lot. You know, you go into the public and people recognize this. You have whole new groups that years ago would never even known about the law's existence. Now are believers in it and sort of amazed that as citizens we have the right to ask our government what they're doing. And they have to respond. I think for many people that's such a reversal of how they're used to working with government. And my day job is a business reporter, and there's so many companies and industries that would kill to be cool and hip with people. Unfortunately, the challenge is usually if you're a cool and hip company and you have new customers, that leads to increased revenue. I don't think that's kind of worked out for FOIA offices. So yes, you're in the vogue and hip and fun. But
Keep
you
going.
don't
We love
necessarily
this.
have the resources to go with it. But I think there's something worth tapping into, and I do hope that we look at improving the process. We look at technology improving the process, and I love thinking about sort of how can we automate some requests in the future. But I think it's also important to sort of realize that this culture of new requesters is coming around, and I think it's a challenge. I think it's when you have new requesters who say, I want any and all documents about X and Y and Z and all the other letters of the alphabet, that presents a challenge and an educational opportunity. But I think it can be a chance for empowerment. I think when you see communities developing, there's Tumblrs devoted to FOIA, as long as Tumblr's still around. There's Instagram hashtags for FOIA. There's whole communities developing where people are starting to really care about this law in a way that I haven't seen in many, many years, if ever. And I think it's an opportunity for FOIA office to figure out how can we constructively engage these communities and how can we use these communities to help reshape what FOIA is. Because at its heart, FOIA shouldn't be about the FOIA process. It shouldn't be about requesting and tasking. It should be about the end result, which is a transparent and accessible government. And I think all the people here work so hard to make that happen. And I know, legally speaking, FOIA actually is about the process, and you do have those mandates. But looking at the congressional testimony before the FOIA Improvement Act, I was struck by what a narrow worldview that it often encompassed. It sort of encompassed talking about fights between requesters and FOIA offices. It implied a lot of things that I don't think are typically true of FOIA offices, because I do think that requesters are excited about this, and FOIA officers are excited about being able to do their job well. And I think one thing that, as a community of both requesters and FOIA officers, we need to do is better message and better explain the value of the work that happens here. There was a study out of Stanford about a year ago that said for every dollar invested in investigative journalism, a community benefits about $100. So if a story costs $1,000 to produce, there's a really good chance that it'll be $100,000 in public benefits in terms of reforms and improvements and reduced waste. And I think, honestly, that equation is probably much better for FOIA offices. If you look at every dollar invested in FOIA programs, how much waste is found, how much improvements, how much public dialogue and new legislation is passed is truly tremendous. But I understand that your FOIA officers, it's very difficult for you to communicate that for a whole host of reasons. And so one thing today that, I think we can talk, and I know some of my other panelists will talk about improved response letters or picking up the phone and calling FOIA requesters. And so many FOIA offices are doing a tremendous job of that today. I was just at the ASAP conference, and customer service. We've been getting a lot more phone calls. We've been encouraging our requesters to take those phone calls. And I think there's a tremendous customer service mindset. And I think the next stage is thinking, how do you scale and broaden that customer service to be customer engagement, not just on one-on-one, because I think we all know that that's really tough to scale unless your budget scales up with it. But what can we do to tackle these issues more broadly? I don't think OGIS and the National Archives should be the only FOIA offices that have a FOIA blog. I'd love to see FOIA offices proactively do more discussing, okay, we're getting a lot of requests for this kind of material. Here's what we can give, here's what we can't give, and here's where you should look before you file a request in the first place. I would love to see FOIA offices be part of broader agency conversations when there's a surge in interest around a specific topic. I know sometimes you'll get dozens or hundreds or in some cases thousands of requests on a given theme. What can we do to take that as a public engagement opportunity and for the FOIA office to work with other components of the agency to turn that into a conversation about, okay, we're working on these dozens or hundreds of thousands of requests, but in the meantime, here's some context. Here's what we can release now. And try and get to the heart of why are those requests coming and how can we use this as an opportunity to, okay, it's going to take a while to get that information, or maybe some of that information we can't get, but instead say what we will do is engage with the public on these issues. And then I think starting to think and really challenge your offices and the rest of your agencies to bake transparency in from the beginning. Because right now, FOIA is a process, and you're kind of given an impossible task. You're told you need to move heaven and earth in 20 days, or else, in some cases, people will litigate on day 20, or these days, even before day 20. And I think that is not a sustainable path in terms of just keeping up with increasing demand with the current resources. And so what FOIA offices need to be empowered to do, and I know there's a lot of limitations, but FOIA offices need to be empowered to start that conversation from the beginning of a program, from the procurement phase for the next database that you're using. They need to be involved in the discussions about which email application your agency is going to use. And I think as a requester community, we're looking for more ways to make sure that we're pushing for the kinds of reforms that allow you to do your job and lead to a better and more open and transparent government for everybody. Because I'm so inspired by the work you do and also inspired by this new generation of FOIA requesters. And so I hope you all see this as an opportunity to rethink what this profession means and how we can better explain the mission and the work that all of you do on behalf of the American people.
Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of everyone here, we really appreciate the kind words. Obviously, there's so many people in this room that I've worked with literally for decades. So I know the words you speak are true, and the commitment inside the government to FOIA is really evident with FOIA professionals, because of course they work in this field every day and love it every day. But it's always rewarding to hear a requester be able to see it. You touched on a lot of things sort of that are applicable to FOIA in a more general, in a broader way. And obviously the idea of proactive disclosures is something that we've all been working on for a while, and the idea of trying to identify things before a request is even made, trying to make sure that that when there's an event that happens in the world, that the agencies, FOIA offices are thinking about it and getting out what they can. But another thing, though, that I wanted to ask you about was the notion of, just more specifically with our topic here today, have you found any particular sort of technique or in terms of dealing individually with a request, with an agency, to be effective? Like, or for the people that you work with who are requesters, is there something that you hear from them that, oh, this really is helpful to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the keys, and Michael addressed this earlier, and I think one of the keys is properly set expectations and properly provide a context. And I think that is such an important component in diffusing so many otherwise tense situations. And I think agencies have gotten a lot better over the last few years in terms of finding ways, and particularly easy ways to kind of to do that. I think one helpful thing I've seen is more agencies are providing estimated completion dates. I'm hoping we can get to 100% there. And I think and one thing I've seen some agencies do that I really like is agencies, when they send their update letter, or when a requester asks for an update saying, hi, your request is 300 in a queue of 3,000, right? And those numbers can be daunting, and sometimes requesters take them the wrong way. But I think for most requesters, seeing, oh, this is not just me, I'm not the only thing on their plate today, is very, very helpful context. And I know, so many other things are challenging to scale, but I'd love to see the community find more ways of providing that kind of context.
No, that's really helpful. I think that and I want to make sure, am I missing? Yes, here we go. Comment here.
Well, I appreciate your expression of sympathy for us FOIA professionals. Has Muckrock cut back on the number of requests?
We have not cut back on the number of requests.
Oh, sorry. I have to repeat the question. Sorry. The question was, he appreciated the expressions of sympathy for the work of the FOIA professional and wanted to know whether Muckrock is cutting back on its own submission of FOIA requests.
So no, I think because we, I think we talked about an energized, a new generation of requesters now, and I think. But we are aware there's a lot of frustration with follow-ups, particularly with agencies that receive fax follow-ups, and that's an issue we've been trying to make major improvements on, and I've been talking with a lot of agencies about what we need to do to cut back on unnecessary follow-ups. I know that's kind of pain point number one in terms of how people perceive us, and understandably, but also make sure that things don't kind of fall off the radar. And so we've made a lot of changes to that over the past 6 months, and I'm hoping we'll make more changes there. And we'd love to engage with agencies on what we need to do to be a productive member, because I know sometimes things we've done can be frustrating. Things we're probably doing as we speak can be frustrating for your offices. And I've met with, you know, a dozen Foia officers in the past 3 days or 2 days. And I'd love to talk with other big folks about what we can change with our process to improve it.
And I have to say, and a lot of people have heard me say this before, we've had just every single year increase in the number of incoming requests for the past decade now. And I have always looked at it as well, I realize it means more work for all of us inside the government. To me, it shows that it works in the sense that people are, in the broader sense that you were mentioning, that people are engaged in their government. They're interested in what their government is doing. They want information about and that the government is all of us and for all of us. So I look at it as a positive thing, and I would never want people to not make requests, other than, with sort of the caveat being that to the extent we as agencies can anticipate needs for information and proactively get information out, that of course is better, but for the goal of informing the public. Like, that's always at the end of the day, the idea here is to have an informed citizenry, vital to the functioning of a democratic form of government, as in the words of the Supreme Court. Okay, so let's move on to our next panelist, Linda Frye. We're moving back to an agency representative, and Linda's with the Social Security Administration.
I have to admit, I agree with the Michaels on a lot of points. Yeah. Our biggest thing that's starting to improve is our communication. When I first started working in the FOIA group, there was a lot of folks who were not comfortable reaching out to requesters. They didn't want to make those phone calls. They didn't want to send those emails. Some of them felt like, I don't want my name out there because then they'll call me for everything they ever want again. We've had a lot of staffing changes. We've had a lot of retirements on some of the older folks, and now the people are more likely to reach out to our requesters, which has been a big help. We just 2 months ago transferred from a really antiquated FOIA tracking system to the FOIA online program, which is already making a lot of improvements on being able to get the documents submitted to us quicker, because a lot of our components we're still printing everything out and using snail mail to send them to us.
No offense to the Postal Service.
No, but when they're already taking almost the whole 20 days just to get the documents, and then having to go through the mail in addition, you know, it created a lot of lag. Whereas now, you know, we're really forcing everyone to submit everything electronically. It's also been a great opportunity because we have the same problem that everyone who provides us records, it's just a small piece of their full-time job. And a lot of them did not necessarily see the urgency that we in the FOIA office would have, because, you know, they have other things that they think are more important. Going to FOIA online has actually given us a great opportunity, because with reaching out to teach everyone how to use this new system, it's given us an opportunity to also reiterate the time frames and why it's important, why we ask, please give us this in 5 days, and, you know, why we're harassing you after that because you don't want to give it to us for 30. Because that's, honestly, that's usually our biggest holdup, is actually getting the records back. So also with, the other thing that we've noticed is we get, because of the nature of the information we collect, we get a lot of requests in, labeled as FOIA requests, that are really Privacy Act requests. Folks looking for their own records, folks looking for records on their grandparents because they're trying to do genealogy searches. So What we've tried to do is we've started doing specialization where we try and get all the Privacy Act requests shunted to certain folks so that we can try and focus more on the FOIA that has that 20-day response requirement, whereas the Privacy Act, we don't have that hard and fast deadline. We are seeing a lot of additional requests than we have in the past for non-Privacy Act. The Privacy Act has been about steady, but I know for actual FOIA requests, right now we're running about twice as many cases as we were last year at this time, and we have lost about 1/3 of our employees, which is making things very difficult and probably really frustrating our requesters because it is taking us longer to answer simply because we have fewer people being able to go through the documents and get them out there. So we know we're not getting any additional resources, so we're trying to figure out how, we're trying to work through how can we make this work. We're really trying to utilize this new system to try and help us improve our workflow.
In terms of your communication with requesters,
Mm-hmm.
do you have, are you finding that it's mostly done through the FOIA Public Liaison, or do you have a FOIA, or through the FOIA Requester Service Center?
Well, our FOIA Public Liaison calls come into the same line that feeds into the Service Center.
Okay.
So a lot of times what will happen is if they go to the FOIA Liaison, she's our next line supervisor.
Right.
So she'll come out and ask the person who worked on the case to go gather the information, tell us what's going on, and then sometimes we will respond directly to the requester. Sometimes our liaison will respond. It just depends on how complex the case is, and if it's something simple, then we just let the analysts handle it.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that I don't think our number of calls have gone up. We have gotten a large increase in emails. But I know also we have started with having the FOIA online, and we're having a secure connection now. We can reply to people a lot quicker through email. We can, get a lot of that clarification that before was done either through mail, because a lot of folks never gave us a phone number, or trying to play phone tag with someone. The other thing we've tried to do is Social Security implemented a program called Skills Connect about 2 years ago. And it's designed to have folks who maybe have a little extra time in their work duties in other components that can help and work on a project for a component that needs assistance. Okay. So what we did is we have actually reached out and created a couple of Skills Connect projects where we now have people who are actually in field offices and in other components who are now helping us with our workload. They're helping us to get everything put into the system. They're helping us to get to close some of the easier cases, to help take the burden off the folks who really need to pay attention to the more complex cases. So we just started that about a month ago, and it's starting to pick up speed now that they're kind of getting their feet under them. That's a help, and we're hoping that will help us get caught up on some of our backlog.
So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking around in case anyone has any comments. Yes, question or comment.
Has there been a learning curve, like a steep learning curve for the people that help, that you bring in, that have extra time?
So the question is, has there been a steep learning curve for people who come in sort of part-time to help as part of what we've called this like a tiger team in other contexts?
Well, as far as helping us to input the new cases that we're still getting in by mail, that's a pretty simple process. And I know all the folks on my team, basically I walked them through like the first 2 ones that they put in, and then they took off and did it. Now, as far as closing the cases, I know I do a phone conference with each of my people. I have them each set up, one works each day of the week. So each day I spend an hour to an hour and a half on the phone, walking them through, this is the process, this is where this applies, this is where we have some template language that you can use to start as the basis of your response letter. And it's taking a few weeks to get them, to know where everything is and how to put everything in the system. But I mean, really, I've only been working with them since the 1st of June, and some of these folks have already closed like 8-10 cases.
Yeah, I was going to, yeah. So, so for people can certainly talk with you online separately or after this for further details about kind of this concept of using other personnel in your agency to help with your FOIA operations. Great. And we're ready for Michael Reznitsky. We're going back to hearing from a requester, and he actually nicely has prepared slides for his talk. And Michael's had a lot of FOIA experience, so we're looking forward to hearing from him.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here in this beautiful building with such important historic documents that are protected and safeguarded, but also made accessible to the public. And those documents remind us of what our government and what our country is really about. So I'm honored to be here. I'm not as eloquent as my fellow panelists, so I wrote down a few notes in advance to talk about. So just a big picture thing. I agree with Michael Morrissey that there is a definite huge cost benefit to benefit over cost for FOIA, and I don't think that's been analyzed. It's probably less than for investigative reporters or for GAO or IGs who always tally up their benefits versus their costs. And those institutions have huge return on making the results of their inquiries public, and I think that FOIA has a large measure of that too. And it's important to remember that FOIA is not a cost center in the government or in an agency. It's really a profit center in the sense that it reduces external costs that may be imposed if things don't get released, or provide solutions for problems that may exist and haven't been articulated well to be solved. So I think overall I have the sense that the public has the right to know, because basically the public taxpayers have paid for all this stuff. Not all of it is something that the public needs to see or should see, but in lieu of any exemptions, really the taxpayer and the public has the right to know, so we have to keep that in mind. It's their nickel. And the news media depends on it, and we really depend as a nation on our free news media. And recently we've seen the value and importance of accurate and responsive news media reporting. So in general, FOIA is an appropriate channel for sharing agency records. The reason why people make FOIA requests is, in some cases, there's no alternative channel to do that. There's good public websites that are available, and I think agencies are always looking for records they can put on those websites. FOIA provides an indication of what other records might be put on those websites to make them more accessible without the need for a FOIA request. And from an agency standpoint, agencies have some very selfish interests here that they can tap into. For example, FOIA can help explain the importance of certain agency programs to the public. It provides an opening for a discussion, a conversation that can be made public. And agencies can't always go out and articulate proactively what they're doing and why, but a FOIA request can help give them that opening. It's an opportunity to engage constructively with the members of the public, as the panelists were saying, especially Michael Morrissey. It can provide an agency with unique insight into the public's specific interest in agency activities. My younger son, who's 11, is a strategy games expert, and he always beats us, but he likes to tell us why he's doing certain things sometimes. Sometimes he does something that we don't understand, and the reason he says is because he's using it to get more information about certain hidden things that we may have. So he's eliciting this kind of hidden information. By paying a small price, he's getting a lot of valuable information he can use to do well in the game. And I think agencies have access to this wonderful information flow, and if they assess it and study it, they can figure out what the public really is interested in and what's going on and what the sensitivities or concerns are. And that's valuable intelligence. What they would call it in the business community is business competitive intelligence. And I think a robust FOIA program that's well accepted can help avoid some FOIA litigation. Obviously, there's people who go in and they know they're going to sue at the very outset. Those are not people who are using the FOIA for the purpose that was always intended. But they are, that's sort of going to be there no matter what. But I think a lot of FOIA litigation may be prompted because a letter was not helpful in explaining why an agency wasn't able to provide something or why it shouldn't provide something. And those letters of explanation, as Michael Bell said, go a long way toward alleviating requesters' concerns. If they get a blank letter, they don't know what to do. But if they get an explanation, at least they're aware of what the agency's thoughts and concerns are. So there's been a lot of recent successes from a requester's standpoint. There's fewer fee-related disputes I see from the new law. More records are being provided electronically. Probably 80 to 90% of all records releases seem to be electronic now versus before they were much less. Document size is not an impediment. You're not worried as much about a huge document that may be available to transmit in electronic form. There's greater recognition by agency staff of access to digital records, which was a concern in the old days and was the subject of court disputes. There's more willingness, I see more willingness by agencies to make discretionary releases, things that they don't need to release, but they decide to. And OGIS audits in particular have been very beneficial in improving the processes. That's been the quiet part of OGIS. OGIS is seen about mediation, but that's handling individual cases. I see the real nut value of this as being the audits where they go in and look at an agency's process and procedures and make suggestions and recommendations for fleshing out those processes to make them more successful. And I think OGIS and also OIP in doing the training and doing the looking at agency FOIA annual reports and the chief FOIA annual reports. And I know that that's a lot of reporting, it's a lot of data, and it's sort of a hassle, but it does provide a window on issues that arise. And I think OIP's work and OGIS's work has been rather quiet but in the public community, but very important in making things better. There's more successes, and this is something that people don't recognize. Even FOIA, even people who write about FOIA think that the backlog problem is growing. There is a few agencies where it is growing, but I see most agencies, the backlogs are shrinking. I see a lot of successes in attacking the 10 oldest requests and that sort of thing. And I really see an improvement in responsiveness from most agencies. That's not all, but most. And there's more outreach by email and phone. Agencies seem much more willing, as other people have said, to get on the phone and ask or talk to a requester or ask for a clarification by email. And FOIA public liaisons, once they're accessible on the phone, can help resolve issues. A lot of times they're very successful in doing that because it's not necessarily a dispute that's a real dispute, it's just a miscommunication. And there's a lot better status information available, either online or through asking for an estimated completion date. And agencies have been generally very cooperative about providing that, even though they do say, you know, this is an estimate. We can't be held to this, but this is what we think. But there are some areas for improvement. Response letters, I've noticed, are often very abrupt or unhelpful. I always tell people to write letters that they would want to receive themselves, and a lot of times the response letters just say B5. You know, they don't even say what privilege is being articulated or cited. They don't explain the specific need to withhold, and I think there's a story there on the other side, if it can be said in a paragraph, why the agency has to withhold this record, and why it can't pick out certain portions of it to release segregable portions of it. There may be a good reason for that, but the requester doesn't know it. Agencies sometimes do not reach out to requesters to clarify ambiguities or poorly framed requests. They basically say, the wording of your request, we have no records. We have no responsive records. But they don't talk to the requester and say, look, you know, you asked them the wrong way. And honestly, it's because you guys don't know what we have. So it's an honest mistake that you described it in a poorly framed way. Some agencies still do not accept emailed records, which I think is sort of appalling in the 21st century. I really think that that's something that can be addressed. I'm sure everyone in this room works for an agency or deals with agencies that do this, but there are still a number of agencies that don't accept email requests, and yet they are willing to provide records by email. They prefer to do that, so I don't understand the asymmetry there. I think it's very important that agencies open up and accept emailed requests. And finally, a lot of agencies still don't take that extra step and say, can we release any of the records that we have given out, that we've denied? Is there portions of it that we can say, you can have this, but you can't have that? And many agencies do this, but some agencies still don't release segregable, releasable portions. More areas for improvement is that agencies sometimes send large fee letters. You know, we want you, please send us $2,000 before we can send you the records. But really, any large fee letter over $1,000, you should make a phone call to the requester. At the very minimum, an email, just to explain what's going on before they get this letter, and it's a shocking letter. There may be an opportunity there for some dialogue, but in general, it just is something that requesters would appreciate, not getting the big, huge fee letter. No records found letters that lack an explanation. Try to provide some reasons in the letter, if you can, for why there's no records found, if there's a story behind this. Exemption B5 is often a big problem, and a lot of times staff are not given the resources, maybe the sample paragraphs to explain why certain things are being withheld for certain reasons. And the deliberative process privilege, there seems to be a lot of lack of knowledge about what really goes into that. For example, factual material is not, for the most part, is not subject to that. There's exceptions, but there's things that are part of a deliberative process privilege, and a lot of times the agencies will just cite it without necessarily, someone told someone to cite that, and they don't explain why it's being cited, and they don't understand that those records may not be applicable. There's a lot of administrative appeals where deliberative process is overturned. And routine denial, it seems, from a requester standpoint, a fee waiver request. It seems like almost everybody who asks for a fee waiver gets it denied. And I know that there's a set of criteria for when fee waivers should be granted, but I think agencies should be willing to take a closer look at those. So I have a few recommendations which I'd like to share. First is facilitate engagement with agency staff. Provide phone numbers, include agency contact people, and this is what Melanie was talking about in her sample language. A lot of times that right now that doesn't exist. It's a mix of different agencies have different processes, but a lot of times there's no contact person listed and no phone number. Keep the agency contact data current on Foia.gov. Foia.gov has the agency contacts for every component in agency that's subject to Foia for the most part, but a lot of the data has over time become not current anymore. And agencies don't always know to keep an eye on that and get it corrected. And Department of Justice really does not have the function of doing that kind of verification. It's a cooperative effort, but I hope that every agency will look at the Foia.gov data for all the components. Make sure the emails and the phone numbers and the names and the addresses are good. Otherwise, people will be sending things off into the void and they won't get any response. Don't call or email requesters. Don't assign the same person to be FOIA public liaison and FOIA officer. That happens in some agencies, and it's been an issue because I think naturally people are reluctant to look at things again if they've already made a determination, whereas someone else can take a fresh look at it and deal with the requester. It's a little disheartening from the requester standpoint if the two people are the same person. And often requesters just do not know what records exist in an agency. They're not record specialists for your agency, and they don't know what they're called. They don't know how to ask for them. So they're asking sort of blindly in some sense, and that's not necessarily completely their fault. So be aware of that and be open to those kind of discussions to clarify that. Try to foster win-win solutions. It's not a problem for an agency to suggest how to amend problematic, awkward, or inelegantly framed requests, of which there's a lot. You can suggest ways that requests can be narrowed, discuss excluding a problem field from a data set. Let's say there's a data set and one field has a lot of personal information that would have to be laboriously redacted through the whole thing. It would take a long time. Call up the requester, say, look, we can give you this, but there's one field that's a problem, and this is why. Would you be willing to take it without that field? And a lot of times they will cooperate. Most of the time, I would say requesters, at least 2/3 or more, will be very cooperative and responsive to requests for a discussion like that to try to make things easier. There are some that won't, but those people are going to be like that anyway. But a lot of people will, and it's worth making the effort. Tell requesters what's typically available or released if they're asking about something, just so you can go through a more normal process instead of a special process to try to adapt to a requester's unusual language. Use the internet to post records instead of sending them out. Sometimes that's easier if you think they're going to be sent out again. And train a staff member in your office to negotiate difficult requests. The FBI does a very good job of that. They have a negotiation team. I guess it's 2 or 3 people that call requesters who have big amounts of data records they're asking for, and they are able to narrow it a lot of times to something much smaller. Try to get a user-friendly FOIA reading room. A lot of times agencies have dumped records out into a website, and it's not really organized that well. Especially dumping out into a thing where you have to search by keyword instead of browsing. Sometimes that means that support from a librarian or information specialist is helpful in formulating that page broken out by subject so people can find things more easily. Because what you don't want is putting stuff out there and then having people having to ask for it again because they can't find it on there. And try to get adequate IT support. A lot of times FOIA offices have a lot of difficulty getting the IT support from a different office to do these kinds of postings. And I don't know how that would be resolved, but having that access to that kind of resource more accessible would be better. OCR has been a topic of discussion for the FOIA committee, advisory committee, and my sense is you can't use it to paralyze everything. You have to OCR when you can, but obviously there's a lot of things that can't be OCR'd very easily. They're older documents. They're not in a format that's amenable to that. So I would say just try your best if you can make things optical character recognition so that people can do searches, people can search on things and find things more easily and use those documents more effectively. And they're also available to people who are differently abled. Creating a what's new section is often useful. Every few months, put up things that identify some things that are new on the site. And then permit some sort of system for email notification. People can put in their email and be notified when new things appear. The IGs do that a lot. And it's not a very technically difficult task to do. Customer-oriented response letters, there was already a bunch of discussion about that, so I'm not going to discuss that at length. But basically, recognize that requesters don't often know what's there, so they need a little bit of extra explanation as to what you're looking at, where you're looking, and what you found or didn't find. And that kind of explanation is really helpful. A lot of times the letters can tend to be legalistic or adversarial because you're using pre-written letters that have been written by lawyers and aren't necessarily very customer-friendly. Fee-related communications have always been a big problem in the past. They're getting better, as I said, but there's a lot of mingling of search and review fees, I've noticed. You can offer suggestions to requesters on how to reduce fees. I know that most agencies already do that. And staff training on fee calculations and fee categories is often useful. Some agencies get mostly commercial requests. So when a non-commercial requester or a news media requester comes in, their fee calculation is not always provided accurately. And finally, I think if I have to say if I have to point to one point that I feel most strongly about is please don't lock down or password protect electronic files. That's becoming increasingly common. A lot of times agencies don't even realize that they're locked down or they're password protected. But, and some agencies have an overriding agency dictate that they must password protect anything going out the door. But a lot of times it's not necessary. It causes problems. It's like wrestling with a pig. It just annoys the pig. And a lot of documents are muddy. Sometimes they're provided in really blurry form. And a lot of times that happens because something is scanned, it's printed out, redacted maybe, scanned again, printed out again. It just goes through multiple transitions, and those gradually reduce the quality of the document to the point where it's hard to read or even use. And I'd also mention a lot of black and white material for some reason is scanned in color, and that raises the size of the files to huge sizes, and it's difficult to get them to a more usable size for requesters to work with. It's very common. It's not in color. It's scanned in color, so it creates multiple layers, and it's very large, huge files. And finally, don't put labels on CDs, because whenever you get a CD as a requester that has a label on, a lot of times they don't work right in the computer, and they're just not readable. It's nice that they're labeled. It's nice that the agency has labeled them, but try to come up with a solution so that you don't have a label that's asymmetric and it jiggles the computer and basically doesn't work. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Gosh, there were so many things I stopped writing down because I could have just had a discussion with you on all these topics for a long time. So much of what you said, completely resonates with us, and we've got guidance to agencies, for example, on fee estimates and the importance of any time an agency is sending a fee estimate that's larger than what would be expected, that there needs to be an explanation. So much of what Michael said, I think, is it's so helpful to hear directly from the requester, because it's really like for inside the agency to be remembering each individual requester is reading that letter. And agencies are working to do as much as they can, as efficiently as they can, to keep their backlogs down, improve timeliness, but at the end of the day, there's one person reading that letter, and if it's confusing and legalistic, and if one extra sentence explaining why you couldn't find a record or why something is being withheld in full would help alleviate problems and answer questions, that's definitely time well worth taking. So I echo so much of what you said. We've tried to address in guidance, and I'm just reinforcing here the importance of it. It's really important to hear it from your perspective. Thank you. Comments? Yes.
I guess one comment regarding the statement that Foia is a profit center to the government. Our fee charges don't
Yeah.
any of those the cost to provide
Yeah.
So just wanted to make it clear that it's not a profit.
Yeah.
Even pay for the resources necessary.
So I'll just let me repeat it, and then you guys can answer. So the comment was that the fees that are collected by agencies under FOIA are the tiny, tiny, less than 1% of the costs that agencies spend on FOIA. And so the comment is, for FOIA, there's just no way it can be considered a profit or cost center.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of examples where we support things that don't drag in as much revenue as they cost because they're valuable to us all. Like the metro system, I think, covers 40% or something of its costs from fares. And, but one would argue that it's immeasurably important to our region. So I think that when I said profit center, I didn't mean literally the agency gets more money and revenue into the agency, but the agency is there to serve the public. And I think that overall, what I'm saying is from the government standpoint, having the ability for the public to ask for records that they feel are important and get them through an appropriate channel that's well managed and well structured is really, really valuable to our democratic form of government.
Yeah. So the comment is no dispute. He understands and agrees. Thank you. Okay, our last oh wait, we have another question. I'm sorry. Oh, there. I'm sorry. Sorry. The light is keeping me from seeing you. Got it. That's okay. I'll just summarize that as the comment is that it's very helpful to a requester to be able to have access to or be told what kind of records an agency has instead of just getting a response that there isn't anything responsive to a particular request, to be able to go to something or see something in a letter or online. And the example was given of NARA's terrific website, so that the requester has a good understanding of what records the agency actually maintains. Yeah, great point. Yes?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
think that there's one thing that bears mentioning here is that the National Archives has published on its website the agency record schedules, which are an important way to articulate those record sets that the agency has and is designating as temporary or permanent or otherwise. And
those are published online. They didn't used to be, but in the last few years they've shown up on the National Archives website, and they're a very useful way for people to look in and see what the records are called or what areas they might be stored in. So the National Archives, that's their function, is to identify records in agencies and designate them for either storage or for disposal, and they do a very good job of that.
Okay, we want to go to our final panelist, Carrie McGuire, who's with, as I mentioned, the head of the mediation team at OGIS.
Hello. So Alina talked a little bit about our increased caseload at OGIS in the last in the last year, pretty much. I'm not going to focus too much on that, except for to say that happily it's provided a lot of data, a lot of anecdotal data. We've learned some things from it. And I want to share some of what we've learned from our increased cases and how it might be helpful to all of you as you're conducting your FOIA work. So we heard from Melanie about the 3 points of contact, basically, where requesters are encouraged to either contact FOIA Public Liaison and OGIS or just OGIS. I'm going to work with those 3 points of contact. The first being this idea of unusual circumstances. So we know that requesters are now must be notified of the services of FOIA Public Liaisons and of OGIS to help assist with cases that involve unusual circumstances and require extra processing time. We also know what those unusual circumstances are. Things like records at field facilities, needs for consultation, and voluminous records. But what I'm a little more interested in is why we see these voluminous records requests and why delays exist. Just to sort of get the obvious out of the way, there are delays because there are more requests than there are necessarily bodies to process them. But some of those underlying whys, from our observation, when we're looking at these large requests, delayed requests, what we're seeing in many cases are huge requests that are a result of a requester who maybe has a lack of trust in the agency. We heard a little bit about narrowly tailored requests being sort of misinterpreted and resulting in a no records response. We do see that fear among our cases, and so folks will ask for everything. I'm not going to trust you to understand me, so I'm going to get everything and figure out what it was that I want. Lack of communication, I don't know what the agency has, so I'm going to ask for everything, and also lack of understanding about the kind of records that an agency might have and what to really ask for. So from our perspective, what are some ways OGIS can help, agencies can help? To a certain extent, this idea of these unusual circumstances cases, it ties to the estimated data completion requirement, the requirement that agencies, make a FOIA Requester Service Center line available so that requesters can check on the status of their request and provide that estimated date of completion. But there's also such a great opportunity here. And we heard some of those best practices today, ways that we can really seize this opportunity to help out. With agencies, we hear from folks even in this room about the importance of letting data talk to you when you're processing your requests. And we've also observed agencies that let their queues talk to them, right? Have an understanding of what each queue of your backlog, the time limit or the time estimates involved with each, the sizes of those queues, and using those to help the requester make better decisions about how many records they actually want in terms of how long it takes to process. Providing categories of records. This is something we've heard the importance of this, just knowing what's available and then also letting the requester know, you've asked for all this stuff, you've asked for emails, do you really want the daily press clips? So thinking about those sorts of things to help folks narrow that request and eliminate some of those categories. So unusual circumstances, some great opportunities there to help folks make better requests. Moving on to adverse determination letters. Again, we know that in the case of adverse determinations, agencies notify requesters of the right to talk or to seek dispute resolution from the FOIA Public Liaison, from OGIS. What we see, some of the common reasons that folks come to us, to OGIS, after that initial determination letter, responses like no records, withholdings in full or in part, and then a broad category that I'm going to just sort of call unperfected requests. So the sorts of things like requests that might be missing a certification of identity or proof of death or that sort of thing. So what are our options here to help requesters? In terms of the no records response, we heard from Michael Reznitsky the importance of providing information about search, about the way records are organized, about records retention schedule. So thinking about those, that's a way that OGIS can help, and also agencies can help if you get these calls. As far as withholdings, Michael Bell talked about going a little further with your letters, and that's a great piece of advice. To think about providing explanations of exemptions. In some cases, suggesting next steps. We see this a lot with letters responding to cases where records are withheld under Exemption 7A. What should the requester do next? We know it's a temporal exemption, but should they file an appeal? Should they file yet a new request in 100 days, 200 days? What does that look like? So thinking about if you receive this letter, you might want to know what your next step would be. And then unperfected requests. Melanie talked about this earlier when we were looking at the contact information provided in those letters in terms of OGIS versus the agency. I would really encourage folks to think about your client base. If you know that there are people or organizations that use your services of your agency who, for instance, still rely pretty heavily on fax machines, make sure that our fax number is not the only number in that letter, because we will get your faxes for you. So really try to get in the mind of your requesters and think about how they might like to contact you. Okay, so moving forward to those appeal response letters. As Melanie explained, since the guidance in 2010, Department of Justice has been encouraging folks to include OGIS's language in appeal response letters. So what are some of the options we have for helping requesters? Well, at OGIS, some of the categories of disputes that we see at this point in the process and ways that we help folks is to explain decisions. Alina talked about how we don't have authority or capacity to ask agencies to overturn a decision, of course, but instead we try to create understanding. We know from hearing from folks on the panel today that folks come back again and again. We've got those sort of repeat customers. We're sort of there's just a network of folks who make repeat FOIA requests, especially now that it's cool. So we need to think about helping to improve the next request, not just responding to the request that's in front of you. So really explain those decisions and, again, improve relationships. Think about those requesters. We all have returning customers, and that can be a great thing if you're using that relationship to improve requests and suggesting next steps. I yesterday spoke on a panel at the American Society of Access Professionals, and one of the phrases that we heard from someone who was in the room on that panel was this idea that customer service is our ultimate goal and responsibility. And I found that really profound and a wonderful statement of a reminder of not only this idea that we're here to help folks know what's going on with our government, but also to serve them in a way that is truly reflective of how we would want to be treated. And I think Michael Morrissey made a really good point about also paying attention to the way FOIA requests and FOIA requesters are changing, thinking about this idea that we're in a collaborative relationship right now with FOIA requesters and making sure that we're always providing that excellent customer service to make sure that that next request is even better. So, thank you.
Thank you. I really, really am struck and really like your comment about really at the heart of this is maybe not so much thinking about or thinking in addition to fixing an issue in a current request, but thinking more broadly about how can we help this requester make a better request the next time. I think that's a great point. And I think lots of agencies certainly have frequent requesters or repeat requesters. And so to the extent that you can get a rhythm or get an understanding of the best way to ask for things going forward. Again, like that helps the process overall. Like we do ultimately, it's great to have these opportunities to engage all along the process, but to the extent both sides know what to do without all that engagement, the more efficient we'll be. And then the more efficient we are, the better FOIA works. So I think that's a great point. Any comments from anyone here about any of this discussion? Yes, here we go. David, hi.
This question is for Linda Frye.
Could I ask people to go to the mics? Yeah, maybe if you go to the mic, then I don't have to repeat it, and it's for the rest of us in the room, yeah, it'll be faster. Thank
This
you.
question is for Linda Frye, who commented on the number of what you call Privacy Act requests that you receive and your specialization. The idea of specialization makes a whole lot of sense to me because you have these handled by people who know how to do it. But you also said that the Privacy Act does not have a 20-day time limit. So my question ultimately is, what difference does that make? Because if a requester labels the request Freedom of Information Act, wants the same kind of information, how does that help you? Do you tell the requester, sorry, the 20 days don't apply?
We don't necessarily tell them that, but it's one of those things where if we have a lot of requests coming in all at once, and we know that we need to try and prioritize what do we answer first, we tend to look at prioritizing the FOIA requests that have that mandated time frame. But at the same time, we try and balance it out because, for example, right now I have a request that has like 300 documents I have to review and redact. I also might have 4 or 5 Privacy Act requests that I could complete in one day. So, what I would do is try and split my days. So I'm working some on the redactions to keep working to get the FOIA release out, but also take that time to try and knock out the Privacy Act requests. The main thing, though, is being able to split them into the folks who specialize in them, because that way we know that we have certain people who are dedicated to working on the FOIA stuff all the time, and other folks who are answering the Privacy Act requests that we still try and get them out as quick as possible, but if something has to get delayed, then we look more toward the Privacy Act stuff.
Yeah, it's overall management of your office.
Yeah.
Sure. Question? Comment?
A comment. A lot of what we've heard today entailed extra requirements on the people who work on FOIA. The 2016 amendments did nothing for us except impose more accountability and such. And Michael Reznitsky has asked us for more things. So I want to give an example. A lawyer who asks for an accident report for a traffic accident at Burleson Air Force Base, and a historian who asks for records relating to CIA involvement in the revolution in Fredonia. They're both covered by the FOIA, and we treat them the same way according to the law, but the way that we handle them is very different. And it would be very helpful for us if we could separate the handling of classified from the handling of unclassified in the Act itself. And also by doing that, somehow tie the classified FOIA to MDR, because the same people sometimes work on them. But the 20 days, the 10-day extension, if you're talking about a 1,000-page document that's classified, it's RD, it's got to go to 6 different agencies, what does 20 days, 10 days mean? It's totally irrelevant. That may take 6 months, perhaps up to a year. So if we could get a change in the FOIA so that the time limits, the requirements, the response requirements were different for classified versus unclassified, that would help us, which is something that we're looking for.
Thank you. Yes, oh, sure, sure.
I'd just like to make a
Yes,
quick
yes,
comment on
of
that. 'cause,
course.
it was just mentioned, a lot of what we've set up here may be extra work on top of what the law already requires of us. And I'm not trying to sound trite or anything, but I really think a lot of the extra things we say are like investments because they'll save us time later.
Right.
If we take care of a lot of this at the beginning, the communication, the extra the extra sentence in a letter that may save us a lot more work later on. So it is a little selfish when we do it in our office, because we're thinking we're going to save us work later on.
Right.
So
It's a really good cost-benefit analysis, and you'll see that the reason I said sentence is because I understand that we can't, as agencies, give a 5-page explanation of our whole record systems and all this and that in response to each request, and not, if we want to have any hope of being efficient in our processing and answering all the requesters. So it's a balance, but it's amazing how 1 or 2 sentences can just be so helpful to a requester, especially when there's something. I always look at it, if there's something really obvious, that you're saying that you have no records, but it just, from what they're asking for, you can understand why they would think your agency has records. If you, rather than have the requester sort of go crazy, why not include a sentence that says, although this is labeled such and such, this other agency is more likely to have it, or given the age of this record, it's more likely to be accessioned over at NARA. Something that gives the requester some explanation. It doesn't take that much time and is obviously just so helpful to the process. Yes, go ahead.
I'd just like to
Both of
comment
you. Yes, of
briefly.
course.
Comment briefly on Michael's, another Michael, his comment about separating out requests that are more complex and intricate and would clearly require a great deal of time. I think most requesters, I can safely say that most requesters understand that. They understand it takes what it takes. The 20 days is there as a guideline, but it's obviously not going to apply in the case of many requests that are complicated. And the only reason it's important that it be retained is that there are requests that have national policy implications, and news media requesters who are always impatient, they may need that administrative closure and administrative remedy to be able to go to appeal and litigation if they need to, if it's something really important. And if it's not there, then they don't have a recourse for months, perhaps, or years. So it is important in the cases where people think it's important enough to go to further steps to get the record, or at least fight for the record. But I think most requesters understand that you guys are doing really hard work. You're doing the best you can under the circumstances, and people just want to know where they are in line. That's the main thing. If you go into the bank and you know where you're online, at least you'll know and you're okay. If you don't know where you're online, they're taking people at random, then people get a little bit antsy. So that's the main thing I wanted to convey.
Sure. And did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'll try and keep this real brief. They're getting picked up. I think kind of going along with what others have said, and to the questioner, I think one thing, I think the FOIA officer community, the FOIA officers have gotten really good at communicating. A lot of them have gotten really, really good at communicating one-on-one with requesters. And I know that a lot of outreach has increased with requester communities, but I think if there's any way to double down in terms of talking to these communities at large, talking to the public at large about the work you do and explaining its importance. I mean, we talked about the punitive measures and sort of no additional resources in the FOIA Improvement Act. I think I was struck by how little public advocacy there was on your behalf. And I think that's because the work you do is often in the background. I think finding ways to bring it to the foreground, to sparking those public conversations, and building alliances where you can so you get credit for the work you do is really important. So public engagement, I think you got the one-on-one engagement down many offices really, really well. And I think figuring out how to broaden that conversation so that you're talking to a larger group is very key on a number of levels.
Alex.
Sure. Alex Howard from the Sunlight Foundation. First, I wanted to thank you all for hosting this kind of conversation with both sides of the requester side, with both the DOJ and the Ombudsman here. I think that's a great example for the country to be setting, to be putting you all on the same stage and having this kind of open discussion, leavened with a lot of humor and asides. I think that there's a lot that's heartening about this. And I want to come back to something that you started off the conversation with around communication and transparency. At Sunlight, we're working with dozens of American cities. I know I've personally spoken to public records officials around the world, and I can tell you that your pain is felt far and wide. And that anecdotally, we are seeing a rise in inbound requests to you all from certainly the media, but other places too. And then I know that your job is probably harder than it was before. Hearing that there's staffing capacity issues is a real challenge. I know the Ombudsman is also a challenge by that. As people are being told about your services, that's increasing demand without necessarily capacity. I'm sensitive to what you all are just told in terms of saying, here are more things you can do. So there's two things that I wanted to share that we're seeing in our experience. One is that when you share more proactively online directly with the public and help them to find records that are about the areas that they're interested in, it decreases the demand upon the public records officers. Certainly here in DC, where I've gone and talked to city council about the issue with the ANCs, which are very, very local government. What they want is, in many cases, requesters want agendas, calendars, basic correspondence, basic information about what's going on. Certainly media are interested in those things as well, and when those are easy to find, it takes away. Talking to the local board of elections, when they share election results, when they share information publicly using social media, using blogs, using email, using all the modern tools that we have, it again takes away demand because people coming to you don't have to use your time, they can simply find the information. And going back to the first FOIA Officers Council that I went to at the White House, you know, there's a lot of concern about publishing information to the internet, to the public. The 508 compliance issue I know is big. I didn't hear about the president's machine-readable data order. That's the last president, 2013, which mandates that if you're disclosing information to the public online, it should not be a scanned image, particularly of data, right? It's something that should be in text form. We are seeing that when those kinds of data sets going online, it means that it frees up the records officers to deal with the more complicated requests, like the classified requests for documents that really require a person to go through carefully. So we hope that you find your compatriots who are working on opening up government data and publishing that online, working with the different agencies, the fellows, the Project Open Data Work, which I know that FOIA Post has shared, and work together to publish these things to make your jobs easier. And that the reading rooms aren't a separate kind of siloed thing from the rest of the agency's efforts to publish information. Just make it easy for the public. And hopefully your jobs will get easier. We really appreciate it. I know Sunlight spent a lot of time talking about how you all need to be better at this, but this is a good time to say thank you for the work you're doing. We know that this year it's particularly difficult. So keep your heads up. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Please join me again in thanking all of our panelists today and our wonderful moderator, Melanie Pistay. We thank you very much for coming with us, to us today in the McGowan Theater and watching us live streaming. I want to in particular thank Michael Reznitsky for the OJIS plug on our compliance program. Although our dance card is a little full right now, we're accepting dance card calls for next year. So if you're interested in that, please come and see us and we'll be happy to chat some more. If there are no other questions, we're going to wrap up the meeting. And thank everyone very much. Have a great day. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry, we do have a question. Yes, we're going to be posting them. Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.